Welcome to this CSIS event, Governing by Numbers, Understanding China's Exam-Centric Education System. I'm Scott Kennedy, Trustee Chair in Chinese Business and Economics here at CSIS, and I'm delighted to host today's discussion about one of the most important but least understood aspects of Chinese society, its educational testing system. Why is it so important? And why is a DC think tank hosting an event on this topic? Because China's testing system is the key gateway to higher education in China and one of the key pathways to career success and social prestige in China. It also plays a big role in why China is becoming a technological powerhouse. And so what we're going to do is talk about that book and what China's educational system means to China and to the United States. We're taking on this topic today because of the path-breaking work of two scholars, Stanford's Hongbin Li and UC San Diego's Ruixue Jia. They, together with Claire Cousineau, have just written a fabulous book, The Highest Exam, How the Gaokao Shapes China, published by Belknap Press. How do I know this book is important? Because The Economist has already ranked it as one of the best books of 2025. In a minute, I'm going to hand over the floor to Hongbin and Ruixue, who will present the main findings of their study, and then we'll have a quiz for all of you. No, I'm just joking. We wouldn't, but that would be fun. Instead of a test, we'll then turn to three fantastic experts for their reaction to the book and the issues that it raises. They are Ethan Michelson of Indiana University, Zhou from Vassar College, and Elizabeth Knup from the Asia Society. After they provide their takes, we'll then have an open discussion. And for those of you watching live, you can submit your questions on the event CSIS webpage, and we'll get to those later in the program. Let me introduce the book's co-authors. Ruixue Jia is a professor of economics at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at UC San Diego. She serves as co-editor of the Review of Economics and Statistics, co-director of the China Data Lab, executive secretary of the Association of Comparative Economic Studies, and co-chair of the China Economic Summer Institute. Her research lies at the intersection of economics, history, and politics, examining how power structures evolve and shape economic development. Her recent work is focused on the political economy of idea formation and diffusion, with attention to the interplay among the state, education, science, and technology. Hongbin Li is the James Liang Chair, the faculty co-director of the Stanford Center on China's Economy and Institutions, the director of the China Labor, Income, and Population Research Program, senior fellow at both the Stanford Institute for Economic Research and the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. He earned his PhD in economics from Stanford in 2001, and before joining Stanford, he was CV Star Chair Professor of Economics at Tsinghua University and a Professor of Economics at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I'm going to turn things over to both of them now, and Ruixue, you and Hongbin, take it away and look forward to your presentation and learning more about your book.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity. Thanks, Scott, and thank Ethan Yu and Elizabeth. I look forward to your discussion. So I see myself as a political economist, and Hongbin is a great labor economist. So I myself have studied Chinese exam system historically and today since 2010. So it has been 15 years. For Hongbin, who is 12 years senior than me, and it's even longer. So we ask ourselves, we have studied the education system for so long. What have we learned that we can share with other people? And as you may know, economists rarely write books. We are the minority of economics who decided to write books with the intention to reach to a broader audience. So we very much look forward to feedback from people in other disciplines. So as we all know, education is important for every society, right? For every society, richer families' kids are more likely to go to Harvard or whatever elite school in that country. So what's special about Chinese education? And I think all of us would agree that it's a very exam-centric system. But what's special about being an exam system? And that's the question motivate us to in our research and also to write this book. And we characterize this system with 3 words, which we call it is a centralized hierarchical tournament. So I don't need to explain why it's centralized. I think this would come back in our discussion. Is if the government designed the system, can allocate the slots, etc. So it's easy to understand. And it's hierarchical. If you grew up in East Asia or if you know this society, it also needs no explanation. And what I want to talk a little bit is the tournament. So what's special about the tournament? So to have a tournament, usually you need 2 characteristics. The first is you need some transparent rule. And it's better to be simple, transparent rule. And then you need some criteria that is measurable and, it's kind of objective. So that's where the test score comes to play a central role. And I like the title of this event called Governing by Numbers. So you need numbers to have a tournament. And what's special, what's the implication of being a tournament? One important feature is I want to emphasize is that it's a selection system. So it may sound a bit ironic that the education system first is a first selection system and second is an education system. So what does that mean? Is that it's actually try to select people based on their intelligence and the diligence. And then this selection can be based on different criteria. Historically, people were written essays, right? They didn't test for math. Today, they were tested for English, STEM, or even maybe AI in the near future. The contents can change greatly, but the logic is the same. It's to select people for hardworking and for intelligence. And this has different implications, right? And one important feature of the system is it has select people at a very early age, like the college entrance exam actually happened when we were 18 or 19. It's and it's loom large in your life, and that's has its strengths and weaknesses we can discuss. So once you understand this framework, this centralized hierarchical tournament, then you can use it as you can think this as a pair of glass, you wear it, and then you can understand different phenomena of China. I imagine a lot of you in the audience have very concrete feelings or sometimes some puzzles about this system, but hopefully this framework would give you a perspective to understand the different phenomena. For instance, in these systems, families would invest a lot. Why? Because in this tournament, 1 point could make a big difference. In fact, Hongbin and I have some research just comparing individuals 1 point above versus 1 point below around the elite college cutoff. We did find that they had different life afterwards. Just for the background, the maximum score is 750 points. So 1 point is not a lot, but it could change your life. So if you have this perception, naturally you want to invest a lot. Only if you can boost, a couple more points, maybe that's change your children's life. So you naturally, want to invest a lot. So that's family's behavior. And how about the state's behavior? From the state's perspective, it's actually a very effective governance tool. Historically, the exam was invented, not for education. As I said, it's for selection, right? For selecting bureaucrats to work for the emperor, and they are loyal to the emperor. So why this is a very good governance tool from the state perspective, not necessarily from common average citizen perspective. From the ruler's perspective, you might like this system because it gives people hope, even though it's unequal, especially nowadays. Families invest so much in the score, so naturally richer families invest much more. It's unequal, but ex-ante gives people equal hope, right? Everyone thinks, oh, if I work hard, I would have a good chance. And if you feel from this system the usually argument is you haven't worked hard enough. So you wouldn't blame this system. So from state perspective, it's good for your legitimacy because it's not the system problem, it's not the system's failure, it's the individual's failure. Right. Also, the government has a lot to leverage about how to design such a system. Many people complained about regional quotas. Some region has higher quotas, Beijing and Shanghai, and some region like my hometown, Shandong province, knowing to have lower quotas. It's very unequal. But from the state perspective, there's political logic of such a power balance strategy, right? This quota system can be dated back to the Ming Dynasty, at least 500 years ago. Again, it was designed for governance, not for individual welfare. And on top of all this, very well thought design for governance, the government can also monopolize, the ideology about what to test. So think yourself as the ruler, you might also like this testing system. And then how about the society? So how to understand societal values? One point we want to highlight in this book is that this education, on the one hand, indeed affects the society, but it also reflects the society. This type of tournament happened in many areas, even in political promotion, at least for a long time, the politicians were competing for some GDP growth, right, or for COVID control. It happened repeatedly. And there's a logic behind all this phenomena. Chinese people are obsessed with the testing system, not because we really like the test. In fact, there are a lot of complaints about testing, about teaching to the test, right, about how harsh such a computation is, etc. But the reason families still prefer this system is I would call it out of fear. It's all about what is the counterfactual, what is the alternative. And in such in Chinese society, everyone knows power influence is everywhere, right? Without such a transparent rule, naturally, the society would be even more equal. It's already very unequal. But the concern is that, if without such a testing system, power influence would be even more prevalent, right? It's this kind of fear of power influence that makes people buy into this testing system. So that's how this tournament obsession is reflect the society. Rather, on the other hand, it also affects the society. As I said, in such a system, you tend to kind of respect the winners and somehow despise the losers. You think losers lose not because of unfairness, it's because they are lazy or they don't, or they are not smart enough. So it's a little bit social Darwinism, right? In such a society, the support for welfare state is naturally low. And I think this question, the society need to think together about the future of China. China has developed quite a bit. Do we still need such a type of tournament and think of what, how to improve the society for the future? And so that's the framework to think about the different aspects. So there's also important implications, not only to understand, but also think about, in this age of US-China competition, is this system helps in China or is actually hurting China? I think that's where the centralized part comes to play a large role. Certainly centralized has its problem, right? Is that not everything can be designed and planned, but so far, it shows its strength, right? When the governments can decide, all the slots for college admission, including how many people in which field, it's naturally affect talent, right? It's like so many Chinese are studying STEM, not because Chinese are really love STEM, we are born to be STEM talents. It's not the case, right? It's more like the government has the leverage, even the slots of college already determined. In the 1990s, the government think biology was crucial. So there are many biology talents. Today, AI become the hottest topic. Then there are more and more talent study AI, right? That shows the government strength, not only in terms of determining the quantity of human capital, but also the type of human capital. Of course, the quantity itself is already very, very impressive, right? It's like now just give you a number, now every year there are 10 million students taking this exam, and 8 to 9 million would become college graduates. So one way to think about it, every year now, look at the world college graduates, 1 in 5 would be Chinese, right? So that shows kind of the strength of this system, right? And at least half of them would be STEM. So think about what this means for the industrialization of the country. So that's one type of implications. And the second, type of implications we talk quite a bit in the book is to think about with more and more Chinese immigrants coming abroad, going abroad, especially to the US and especially to regions like California, for instance. And there's collision there, right? The exam-centric, system is very transparent. It's kind of has objective rule, whereas the US system is holistic, is opaque. So there's naturally kind of a collision there. I see 3 reasons why there's this, high-level case like the Asian Americans against Harvard, and there's many local cases, especially in California. So I see 3 reasons why, the Asian families, also the Chinese families, are obsessed with the testing system. As I said, the first one is related to the domestic culture, right? Is in a society where people are afraid of power and power influence. They prefer this transparent rule. And being immigrants mean that naturally you don't have so much social capital to think, to really excel in this holistic, type of admission rule. You needed to excel in all these extracurricular activities. You needed to attend all these social events. Those things also involve a lot of, social capital. And being immigrants, naturally you don't have that strength. So you also want to avoid those criteria. I think on top of these 2 reasons, there's a third one, is that these people who migrate to the US, the Chinese, most of them are already selected. They were pretty successful from the exam system. They were selected from such a system. They naturally, feel a little bit proud and think that their children could also succeed through similar mechanism. I think these 3 reasons together, shape this kind of culture obsession with the testing system. And to really mitigate this is need mutual effort, right? It needed the immigrant community have more trust in the American institutions, right? As I said, the initial obsession was due to lack of trust of institutions, right? Lack of trust in power. But also, the institutions themselves needed to get these communities more integrated, right, to build this mutual trust. And now it's a bit sad because they basically blame each other rather than trying to understand each other's reasoning. So that's another set of examples of the potential implications. And the third thing we discussed a little bit in the book, even though it's very difficult to provide empirical evidence, but I still want to highlight it, is that you will hear this a lot in various podcasts. As long as I listen to some China podcast, people are talking about this hypothesis. Well, Chinese, education system kills creativity, or like, oh, Chinese are very good at incremental innovation, are bad at 0 to 1 innovation. You hear this again and again. I just want to, make some remarks on this according to my understanding. I think creativity is a very loaded word. It's difficult to know what it means. I do think the testing system does hurt certain type of skills. I feel it's more useful to be specific about what type of skills that gets stifled by the testing system. I would say at least 2 important skills are stifled. One is social skills, right? Social skills have always been very important for the labor market, and it's maybe even more important with automation and AI in the future. I wish I had better, social and the communication skills. Then this video would be more fun to listen to. But anyway, please bear with me. So that's kind of communication skills, because we were basically, tested for memorizing certain knowledge, solving some math problem, etc. So we are not, certainly it's not fostered. The communication skills are not part of our education. And the second type of important skills, I would say, is this courage to challenge authority, which is certainly discouraged by the testing system, because students were basically encouraged to cater to the right answer rather than challenge the right answer or the authority. But I also say this is more about how education reflects the society, right? It's not the education itself, it's the whole society doesn't encourage, the junior to challenge the senior, or the young challenge the older, or a professor to challenge his dean. So it's a very systematic problem rather than the education alone. So if you only blame the education itself, it doesn't solve the problem, right? Think about the talented Einstein, let's say, who were educated in China, let's say, but if he, went to get to work in a factory or work in a school, he still needs to, develop his good relationship with his dean or his boss. It certainly wouldn't, be great for creative destruction. So I want to emphasize is, if you want to see this problem of the innovation or this creative destruction, I would say it's more about the societal problem rather than the test alone. The test is just a tool. Rather than the fundamental problem, not the root of the problem. So let me just, I don't want to keep going, and I really look forward to hearing the feedback. So let me just summarize how we think about the Chinese education, maybe in one sentence. If you ask us, I would say, the Chinese education system is a centralized hierarchical tournament, and this tournament is implemented by the exam, these hundreds of exams. We call it, of course, with the highest exam, the Gaokao is the peak of these hundreds and thousands of exams. But the exam is a tool to implement this tournament, and it's fundamentally a governance tool. And of course, it has education as a byproduct of such a design. So I shut up for now and say, get some, thoughts from you. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ruixue. I really appreciate that overview. And just for folks watching, we have a little bit of technical issues getting Hongbin on, but thank you for providing the overview of really a fantastic book. Let me introduce our three commentators who are going to provide their feedback on the book and the issues it raises, and then turn things to each of them in turn. Ethan Michelson is professor of sociology and law at Indiana University Bloomington, where he has been teaching courses on law and society, law and authoritarianism, and contemporary Chinese society since 2003. He has won several awards for his published research on China's legal system. His most recent book is Decoupling: Gender Injustice in China's Divorce Courts, which is published by Cambridge University Press in 2022. Zhou is a professor of geography at Vassar College. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees in urban and environmental sciences at Peking University in 1986 and 1989, respectively, which means that she has not only taken the Gaokao herself, she clearly did very, very well. She is the author of The Inside Story of China's High-Tech Industry, Making Silicon Valley in Beijing, which was published by Rowman and Littlefield in 2008, and the lead editor of China is Innovation Nation, which is published by Oxford University Press in 2016. Elizabeth Knup is an Honorary Senior Fellow at the Asia Society's Policy Institute's Center for China Analysis, where she analyzes Chinese domestic social and governance trends and the evolution of civil society. From 2013 to 2023, she served as the regional director for China at the Ford Foundation, where she oversaw Ford's operations and risk management in China and its programmatic strategies focused on U.S.-China relations, the impact of China's political and economic power outside of China, and strengthening China's domestic, philanthropic, and civil society sectors. She previously was the American co-director of the Hopkins Nanjing Center for Chinese and American Studies and worked with the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, the Pearson Group, and Kamsky Associates. She recently contributed a chapter on civil society leader Zhang Ye to the terrific book, Chinese Encounters with America, Journeys That Shape the Future of China. I'm so glad all three of you are with us today. I'm going to turn things over first to Ethan, and then you, and then Elizabeth. Ethan, take it away.
All right. Well, apologies, first of all, for speed reading my allotted 5 minutes. Here are what I see as the basic pieces of the story that Ruixue will tell in their truly wonderful book. An elite university education is the primary, if not the only channel to high-status state sector jobs, which are still highly coveted in China. And a high Gaokao score is the only means, the sole means of admissions to an elite university. The centralized hierarchical tournament is a super high stakes and super low probability rat race. It's a zero-sum, winner-takes-all system that starts almost before birth, and probably before birth in many cases. The real grind is getting into an elite university. So university education itself is hardly a grind. If you're one of the very few who succeed in this tournament and get admitted to an elite university, you'll likely kick back and rest on your laurels after you arrive there. It's like, okay, my work is done here. I can relax and play cards and drink beer. According to the authors, this helps explain why primary and secondary education is so strong and higher education relatively weak in China. By providing a perceived channel for social mobility, the Gaokao, like the Keju, Imperial Civil Service Examination, for over 1,000 years, incentivizes people to work within the system rather than to rebel against it. This ingenious system was designed to foster elite cohesion and loyalty, and also to undermine collective action against the regime by keeping people busy competing against each other for the chance, albeit an improbable chance, to join the elite. In so doing, the Gaokao operates in the service of social and political stability. The authors tell this functionalist story by bringing together evidence from a lot of secondary scholarship, much of which is their own research, as well as their own autobiographical experiences getting into an elite university. My overall feeling from reading the book was one of profound inferiority. And I expect this book will give a lot of readers an inferiority complex or reinforce existing ones. And people are going to feel like I did, Wayne and Garth in Wayne's World. You know, I'm not worthy, for those of you who get this obscure reference. I barely worked in high school and was only a mediocre student. Never took a test to get into university. I'm from Canada. We don't have the SAT or the ACT. However, once I got to university, I busted my ass. It was kind of the opposite of the Chinese student experience. And in fact, the authors discuss these cross-national differences. Now, let me ask a big picture question about the author's functionalist argument. Presumably, the stability maintenance functions of the Gaokao are premised on a stable pipeline between elite universities and good jobs, right? Like high status elite jobs. In recent years, however, this pipeline started leaking in a big way. What are the implications of major cracks in the pipeline, which the authors allude to in the book? They definitely allude to it, but they don't discuss in great detail. Let me now turn to the question of popular support for this tournament system. The authors report a pervasive belief in China that the Gaokao is fair, that it rewards talent and hard work, Their story is that Chinese people tend to believe that the Gaokao is not only meritocratic, but makes China as a whole more meritocratic. The authors tell us that Chinese people embrace meritocratic values, that Chinese people believe that meritocracy should exist and does in fact exist. Thanks to their meritocratic values, Chinese people reportedly accept and tolerate a lot of inequality. Insofar as they believe that inequality is a function of merit, Chinese people believe that the distribution of wealth is fundamentally fair. And they provide evidence to support this this picture that they paint. They analyze data from the most recent Wage and World Values Survey. They summarize findings from a 2016 article published by Martin White, which is a very empirical piece. And from these sources, the authors paint a picture in which tolerance of inequality is pretty high and pretty stable. I just want to point out very, very quickly that there's quite a bit of sociological research on this very issue, by people like Ruixue Jia at Princeton, Xiaogang Wu at NYU, Yawen Lei at Harvard, a lot of sociologists based in China, that actually paints a far more mixed picture and a rapidly changing picture of meritocratic values and the relationship between meritocratic values and tolerance for inequality. And basically, the most recent studies show that meritocratic values have declined rapidly in China and do not buffer inequality. And so, do not support a tolerance for inequality. Things have changed a lot. If I had more time, I would talk about this very popular word in China, involution, neijun, that has emerged. Discourse and culture about this word, and the anthropological literature led by anthropologists like Xiang Biao about involution in China and its impact on Chinese society, the quantification of life around the world, the rise of metrics, indicators, rankings everywhere in the world. But I'm out of time. But I really enjoyed the book, and thank you very much for writing it.
Ethan, that was really very, very helpful. Terrific, terrific. Zhou, over to you.
Thank you very much to invite me to this panel. And I want to correct Scott that 1980s, the Gaokao isn't as hard as it is. So, but I do wanted to sort of coming from this about sort of lived experience, which I really appreciate about this book, is bringing lived experience of both the author themselves and also with more statistics talking about everyday life. So my task today is to think about how exam affecting China's technological innovation, which has been the area of my research. So I'm going to focus on that topic. If we have time, we can talk about other things. And there has been a longstanding critique of China's examination system, that it is encouraging rote learning, it's highly centralized, hierarchical structure with standardized curriculums and exams, so which Ruixue has just talked about, and that is believed to stifle creativity and innovation. Although from both Ruixue's talk and also the book, I find that there's some ambivalence, right, in the book, because it seems now China is doing well and innovation. But the idea is true that Einstein probably won't thrive in China's system. So ultimately, I see the book is sort of leaning toward agree with the view that China may doing well right now as technologically follower, but would have trouble to come as a true leader in the system. I share many of the book's concern in terms of how it's affecting the society in so many ways. I do also agree that this hierarchical structure and the standard exam are particularly bad for people in social sciences. So if you can only memorize standardized answer, you won't learn to challenge the dominant narrative or even raising questions. So that's a huge problem, and most of us in social science really do find that. But I may just throw some disagreement here. So let's see whether, we can have more discussion. I disagree with applying this critique to China's science and technology education, because I think it's misunderstood what rule learning actually is and what science innovation actually require. So let me explain why. First, rule learning in science is not about memorization. The purpose is actually to build muscle memory, the ability to quickly perform basic functions and apply core concept like a reflex. So what it does is free up the cognitive space for more complex question. In exam, it means that the student can move through more questions very quickly to save their time on harder questions. That was my strategy. That's probably a strategy of many others. Education is actually called cognitive offloading. So the same principle apply in science research. It's not really much to be gained to spend time on, factor a polynomial or take a derivative. So you can focus on more difficult questions. I actually do wish American education system do more such training. My students at Vassar are very bright, but they often stuck on problems, basic problem that Chinese student flies through. So they felt frustrated and discouraged even before they reach the hard part. So you can see that why China trained scientists disproportionately represented at the frontier of complex science questions such as artificial intelligence. The second is that there is this tendency in America to attribute innovation to individual geniuses. It could be Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, long past, and Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein. But this great man's view misses what innovation really happened in China, and I would also argue in the United States. So I had my own theory of China's innovation model, which is different from the books. This is not a book's focus, but books agree that China as a follower. So I call it the DREAM model, so DREAM. So I'm going to very quickly. And these stand for dialogue between state and commercial enterprises, but that's not a topic I want to do today. R is for research. You see China increasingly turn to domestic research from imported knowledge. E refers to industrial ecosystem, a complex supply chain where firms recombine, repurpose components to create a new product. A stands for cumulative changes, the kind of rapid iteration built on each other's work, like in EV. M is the middle market, which focuses on functionality and affordability rather than being cutting edge, not the rich market. So in this model, innovation has been collective and cumulative. It's not need only a few visionaries, but a broad base of technical skilled people who can execute, iterate, and improve on ideas. And actually, if you look at the Chinese examination system, it's actually do produce this type of labor force. And in particular, we tend to fail to appreciate what this exam actually does is to train students for their discipline, perseverance, or grit, and the capacity for delayed gratification. So if you think about students prepared for this exam, they do countless problem sets just to raise their score a little bit. This is pointless from outsiders, why you do same thing over and over again. But if you translate that into scientific research, when your biological experiment failed for the hundreds of times, will you try again? In technology, when your product doesn't work, will you tweak it over again until it does? Many Chinese students do have the mental capacity to do just that. So my point of innovation is that it does not emerge from vacuum or a few geniuses. It takes the entire ecosystem and layers of talents who carry the process through from idea to product, from prototype to production. So in this regard, Chinese education did serve this purpose, and I totally agree. There are so many flaws of evolution and so on and so forth, and psychological impact, but it does produce that talent that China is counting on. So I'm stopped here. Thank you.
Terrific. I think you just demonstrated that regardless of how hard the exam was in 1989, you're a stellar scholar. So really terrific. Really appreciate your feedback. I'm going to turn things over to Elizabeth Knup right now, but I'm just going to let folks know we've solved our technical problems. We do have Hongbin on as well now, and when Elizabeth is done, we'll go back to Ruixue and Hongbin for their reactions to our commentators' views. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. And I really loved reading this book. And I guess so many things that I was going to touch on have been touched on by the previous two commentators. So I'll try to be quick and not repetitive. I mean, first of all, I would just say this book is for people who are not familiar with China or the education system. It's an excellent, rigorous, empirical based analysis of that particular system. And then I've lived in China for 25 years, and I still learned a lot about how the system works. And also really just appreciate this encapsulation of the idea of the education system as a centralized hierarchical tournament. Particularly this idea of a tournament was very, very helpful for me, not only in understanding the Gaokao itself and the whole system, but broader swaths of Chinese society and understanding how groups work and how people are motivated in the society. I think this framework of centralized hierarchical tournament is a very, very valuable one that I will continue to draw on. So I really appreciate that. I think that there are like all kinds of really fabulous and neat frameworks. There are ways in which it's not always consistent, and I want to kind of draw on a couple of these, but that's not to say that the framework itself isn't a fundamentally important lens through which we can start to look and try to understand Chinese society. I think when we talk about the centralized nature of this system, it is quite clear that it is a tool for government and always has been for 1,000 years. I also think that when we look at what's happening now and into the future, which I think is what the other two commentators have sort of talked about, what is the relationship between the centralized nature of the system and the social pushback? And I think that I think one of the things that a lot of outside observers of China fail to understand is that there really is a way in which the people of China do push back against their government in many ways, and often causes the government to change. And so you mentioned in the book one very small mention of when the Chinese government has recently thought about revising the current Gaokao and its content and its, how it works. And there was immediate, enormous pushback from the people who are benefiting from the current system against change. And I would really love to hear a bit more about that dynamic, because I think probably the Gaokao does have to change going forward in society. But if the government actually is constrained in making that change, then how centralized is the system really? So that's just a question of the degree of centralization. And this gets to, I think, another observation, which is this question, and Ethan actually was very articulate in this, so I'm not going to belabor it, but this tension between meritocracy and hierarchy, and perceptions of meritocracy, and sort of how that plays out in society and is brought to the United States with the immigration of many Chinese families to the United States. I will say that the Marty White and Scott Rosel's most recent research, which is very well documented on CSIS's website, does indicate that as of 2023, the number of people who believe that they are either poor or rich because the system is rigged in one way or another, as opposed to their own personal laziness or lack of ability or talent, has really shifted, right? For many, many years, most Chinese people have reflected, or at least in their survey, have reflected that hard work and education and discipline and effort have been the drivers of determining who's poor and who's rich. And now it's reversing. And people are really beginning to see that the system itself may be kind of rigged in one way or another. Now, I think this is, one data point on a spectrum, and it came right after COVID. So it will be interesting to kind of see if that tendency, that way of thinking keeps developing. But there are ways in which you can see people opting out of the Gaokao system, people lying flat, people running away. And again, this is not something I know empirically what percentage of people are opting out of this system, but I think it's worth thinking about into the future. And I guess the final thing that I will comment on is the notion of common prosperity. So if you look at society and people are beginning to feel that they can't get ahead and that social mobility has stalled, then perhaps the common prosperity idea coming from the central government is aiming at trying to rebalance what the citizens are beginning to feel is an unbalanced society of unbalanced opportunity. But what is concrete? What really does common prosperity mean concretely in the lives of people? I think is unclear at the moment. And where will that rhetorical framework end up taking the government and society, I think is an interesting question. And so I do want to allow you guys to have some feedback, but I also wanted to, if we have time, to talk about, I think the strength of the book is in analyzing and describing what happens in China through this system. I think it gets a little bit more challenging when we start to extrapolate what that means for the US. And I think that's also where you have less of the empirical data. So I think that's a place that we can explore more, the connection between sort of the Chinese sort of concern about the holistic approach and that's connections to sort of Supreme Court cases on affirmative action. I'm not sure that's a direct causal relationship there. And there are many, many other things in the US that have caused us to question affirmative action and to question some of the ways that we reward effort in the United States. So I think that part of the book could use some more. Maybe your next book can go into that a little bit more deeply. And I will just stop there.
Hey,
and I
that's
look
terrific.
forward to any other conversation.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, and to you, Ethan, and you for your comments. I want to turn things back to Ruixue and welcome Hongbin to the stage as well for a few minutes to give you guys a chance to remark on what you've just heard from Ethan, you, Zhou, and Elizabeth. And then I've got a couple questions I wanted to raise as well, but I wanted to give you a chance just to immediately respond to the commentators' remarks.
Hongbin, do you want to talk a little bit?
Oh, yeah, sure. So sorry to be late. Actually, I only caught the last part. So actually, I agree with both you and Liz comments. Actually, most of the comments actually are great. I think I do agree. I don't know, Ruixue. Considering actually whether the Gaokao should be reformed, I think you're right. There are many attempts to change it, actually. Whether it's basically banning tutoring or trying to reallocate some of the quotas from the more developed regions to like Western regions. I mean, many of these reforms actually got pushed back. Even some reform trying to reduce the load or stress of students got pushed back. So for example, when I was working in Beijing in Tsinghua, so there was an attempt to reform Gaokao to have more frequent like exams, like Americans AP exam, like Chinese AP exam. So the idea is to not take the exam only once in a year. You can take many times. Once you pass, you pass. You don't have to take again. So this will reduce stress, right? The problem with the reform is that this will benefit greatly the urban students. So then the rural students, for example, we want to have AP economics, but who can teach economics in high school? Only the elite high schools in the urban area. So this exam, actually, I was part of this. We even wrote a textbook for this, but in the end, the reform didn't go forward, actually, move forward, because I mean the societal pushback. I mean exactly the point you made, actually, yeah. I think yeah. So also, I mean, for this the last point, we agree that the book raised a lot of questions, a lot of questions we couldn't even answer. We hope, I mean, not only us, so there are so many great scholars in the US, in the world. Someone can help us to like answer many of the questions. Ruixue.
Yeah, I just thanks a lot for, it's so nice to hearing so many different perspectives. I think one crime we committed is certainly we didn't cite enough of you and people in your field. That's actually it's a very thin book. I want to just clarify one thing. It's not that we are kind of argue the exam system works well. In fact, one point we try to deliver is this institution worked fine, maybe when it was restated in the 70s, 80s, even 90s, earlier 2000. I took the exam in 2000. At that time, families were poor, don't have many resources to invest in this system. And now with, as China has developed, more and more families have some resources to invest in their children. Of course, some families has much more resources. So it has becoming a much more unequal system. It used to be a channel mobility. Now it's almost like a burden to many, many families. So I think it's time to think about how to reform the system. And there's so many things to be improved. And that's coming to the Ethan specific question. It's like indeed the macroeconomic slowdown is a big issue. It's reflect the problem of this centralized planning system, right? You expanded the college education for it's such large scale, but it's difficult to know to predict the labor market. So now this college unemployment of college graduates is a very important social problem. But in the short run, at least, it didn't really threaten the whole system. What we observe is more like, as you may know, if you visit China, people now, in the past, they already prefer to go to the state sector, and now even more so, and to the state public sector. And for this type of sector's jobs, because it's very difficult to really know individual ability. If you work for a company, they can still know your ability. For this type of public sector jobs, credentials are even more important, right? So the education is even more important. So in that sense, it's kind of a paradoxically reinforce the importance of Gaokao, because as we know, education serves as a stratification function for most societies, right? So now, at least in the short run, in the long run, maybe this will become a fundamental political challenge. In the short run, people are still investing a lot in this credential system so that they can, be able to have a chance to go to the state sector. And another big point I have been thinking for long and asking myself is about these changes and persistence of Chinese society. On the one hand, China has changed so much. You can argue that, the sociological research you mentioned, I read them. I feel guilty. We don't have space to really discuss this in detail. I committed many crimes probably. But anyway, lock me up later. But anyway, so the idea is, there's indeed a lot of changes of this Chinese society. On the other hand, there's, many things, values are so slow moving and so much persist. I think the reality is likely to be a weighted sum. And I think the sociological research are fascinating because they focus on the changes. On the other hand, being someone study economic history, I also read research people related like this historical exam with today's belief, right? That suggests certain things are very persistent, like this value to go to the state sector, right? That's very analogous to the gentry class in the imperial exam system, right? It's thousands of years, people still hold this value. So I'm also asking myself, I don't have an answer, like quantitatively today, Chinese value is likely a weighted sum of this, this long-lasting belief in meritocracy and with very fast changing society, especially the macroeconomic slowdown in recent years, which part, I think empirically I see both are relevant. I don't have an answer like, oh, it's 80% this, 20% that, right? And we always need to be also cautious when we look at survey data, because often, if you look at who answered this survey, it's often very, I talked with Scott about this. I think he knows it very well. Who is answering those surveys likely to be a selected segment of the population. So I don't have a very, kind of satisfying answer myself, but in my own research, I was also asking myself, like always like this persistence and the changes of the Chinese society. On the one hand, I wish China could change quickly, totally think about reform the whole system, because to me, this system is a bit too hierarchical, too much burden for so many families. I think it's a very effective governance perspective system, right? From if I'm a ruler, I want to keep the system, but if I'm a Chinese citizen, I wish to see more changes. But on the other hand, I'm a bit skeptical that this would change very fast, given that this is a stratification tool and this hierarchical, this flavor, like people still want to have their credential, and the best jobs are still in the state sector. I would think this wouldn't change as fast as I wish, actually. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for your reactions to the commentators. I know we're running close on time, but I wanted to offer a few comments/questions and then let everybody weigh in briefly before we end. And so I guess I take away from the book how, to use Ethan's word, how functional this system is meant to be as a glue that holds Chinese society together and between the state and society. And it's worked a lot, but it's not perfect. And in fact, if there is a significant gap between the impressions of what this system does and what reality is and the experience of people, then actually the system goes from legitimizing the system to undermining the system, right? It can end up being the tool by which people would turn on the system. And so there has to be some level of connectivity between the process of preparing for the exam, the content of the exam, and what people's life opportunities are. The bigger that gap is, the bigger the problem is. And I think that's what some of the questions about the book are raising is what does that gap look like, and what do Chinese people feel that way about? I guess a couple things I've been worried or interested in about is in discussions of reform in China, you hear a couple things that people have been talking about lately, and I'm just curious how those would intersect with the exam itself. The first is the hukou system, the residency system. A lot of people have been talking about the need to eliminate the hukou system, radically reform it at a minimum to address issues of the housing problems, of social mobility outside the testing system in terms of jobs and things like that. But you all described the hukou system as absolutely central to the exam system. So what would happen if the hukou system were eliminated? Or is it impossible to eliminate the hukou system simply because it's so tied to everyone results and the quotas? The second is artificial intelligence, right? Now everyone's developing these large language models. It's all over the talk in China, in the US, everywhere else. And so there's a substantive question about how do you train and prepare people to use AI. And then there's the question of the extent to which AI might be replacing labor, right? In which case that might exacerbate the challenges of people investing all of that time if they think the returns from the test don't translate into social status and jobs. So what does AI mean for a system like this? Those are a few things that I thought about as I was reading your absolutely fantastic book. Why don't we go to Ruixue and Hongbin first, and then Ethan, you, and Elizabeth to wind things up.
Hongbin, do you want to?
Yeah. So I think these are all great points actually. Regarding the first question is about whether China should change the system because it may not function well if it cannot be part of social mobility, right? So I think that's a great point. I think compared to the time when I took the Gaokao, today is less effective than like 40 years ago or 30 years ago. Like when I took the Gaokao, the society was very equal. Ironically, because of the Cultural Revolution actually. So then everyone really had a chance. As long as you score well, you can do well in the society. Today is much harder, to be frank. So the how ready you are in exam depends on how wealthy you are and where you're born, your hukou. So this is exactly the point. But the issue is that suppose China wanted to change this, what is the alternative? So that's a harder question actually. So because the holistic system definitely won't work in China for sure. So people don't even trust that system. I think reforming the hierarchy or flatten the hierarchy is exactly the point. I think Scott is raised. Hukou is the central part of this hierarchy. Rural urban. Also, hukou is closely linked to the quota and to the exam system, which makes it extremely difficult to reform because this is people's interest. Once you change it, some people will lose, some people will win. Ideally, you would want to have one exam for the country, one admission system, right? One quota system for the whole country. That would be ideal, right? So if you think really meritocratic, right? But that's extremely difficult to do. I would say this is not going to happen anytime soon. The last question is very deep and difficult to answer. How would AI affect the education? Not only in China, also in the United States, actually. US, we can see with our own eyes that it is more difficult for college graduates to find a job, even in the US actually today, compared to like 5 years ago. But this AI is a really new thing. And there is a hypothesis that AI also will affect China more because China emphasizes memorization of knowledge, which is exactly what AI is good at actually. So you cannot beat AI for that. This is actually a huge challenge. AI also affects how we educate our children, actually, our students, because they can learn from AI maybe better than from professors like Ruixue and me. So then what we can do, right, with the education system, we really don't know, but this is a huge challenge. I mean, it may also, I mean, to be frank, reduce the return to education, which is one of the important argument in the book, also in a whole economic literature. That we assume that people go to college and they can make more money than without going to college. In the future, that may not even be true actually, because the so-called hard labor work may not be easily replaced by AI, but it just happen to be the so-called skill jobs, or those jobs for college students will be replaced by AI. So I think that's really, really a huge challenge. I think we need really to spend time to research on the topic.
Thank you. Ruixue?
Yeah, I just first I found the both are great questions. I think abolishing the hukou system at the national level would be very difficult. I wouldn't think it exactly as you said, it concerns so many interest groups. But there's some other reform that the government can do without creating too many losers, I feel. For instance, the one fundamental reason is this college college system is too hierarchical and uniformly hierarchical. And it's a bit funny because China is a public education system, right? And if the government really wants to make it a bit more equal, it has the capacity to reform it without creating too many losers. So I still think there's scope for for reform rather than it's politically feasible reform in my mind. And coming to AI, perhaps because I study economic history too much, in the sense I I feel like education's function, as I said, of stratification has been so crucial from history till today. I do think technology, the technological change, AI, maybe this time is different. AI is totally different, could be from all types of technology. But if you ask me, I wouldn't be so I would think it would be slower than many people thought if in terms of education changes. And that's would, maybe I think of history too much. Like we see so many technological changes, yet the social structure played a fundamental role rather than the specific technology. But I could be totally wrong, right? I could be so different that I just lack the enough knowledge and imagination. But if we have to bet, I'll bet this social function, the social structure still dominate the technological change.
Thank you. Ethan, a final word from you, and then to you and Elizabeth.
Yeah, just super quickly, returning to the question of meritocratic values and the extent to which they provide kind of a legitimacy or a political buffer, right, against the damage from intensifying inequality. I too, like Elizabeth, immediately thought of this brand new study, Roselle and White, showing this like tectonic shift. But I don't, from the sociological literature, I don't think it's necessarily, a COVID or post-COVID story. That the sociological literature shows that the inflection point was maybe 15 years ago. In fact, sort of between 2009 and 2014. But I also totally agree with Ruixue that it's really, doing survey research is very, very tricky in China. It's hard to get good samples. It's hard to get good answers. It's, there's social desirability bias. I mean, it's a moving target. It's like very, very difficult to analyze data like this, particularly repeated cross-sectional survey data. And so I belong to the school of thought that says that, it's less important whether you're right or wrong. I'm not saying that the authors are wrong at all, but being right or wrong is far less important than stimulating debate and setting a research agenda, I think. And that's what this is a wonderful book. If that's all, it does much more than that, but it does that. It's going to stimulate a lot of research and set a research agenda for many years. So thank you for that.
You?
Okay, thank you very much. So these are two hard questions. Scott always raises hard questions. So I think though, when we think about hierarchical, I agree with both of you sort of criticism of hierarchy, but I think changing hierarchy, you have to keep in mind that a lot of people in my mind in China is actually wanting to maintain the hierarchy, not want to change it. So this is where the difficulty runs into, right? So there's a lot of existing interest in maintaining the hierarchy. I do want it to maybe in the future, if we can also look at the lower hierarchy school and what they do, I think that's actually a quite important issue, which I'm sure you all know a lot, maybe write another book, because I think that lower level school actually raises children's level more higher than their parents than the sort of elite school does. So I think the thinking through the hierarchy, what it does do is interesting. AI, everybody who teaches today struggle with AI. What do we learn? What we should teach? China is aggressively embracing AI in a way that I don't fully understand, that both in terms of technology and in education. So it's an interesting experiment, a little bit. Is it a thoughtless, or is it something like they have figured out and decide? I don't know. So I do think many things will continue, like Ruixue said, that the sort of a practice rule learning again is horrible in social science, but I don't know, they will lift it up in science education. I imagine the kids still memorize multiplication table when they're 5. So anyway, so it's a good question to think about, but I'm particularly partly puzzled and partly intrigued by why is China seem to have a lot to lose on AI replacing jobs, because there are a lot of people need jobs. Why it's embracing it in such extent? So,
Elizabeth.
So our conversation has really stimulated so many questions, and I agree with Ethan. This is just like an incubator for new research ideas and questions. I'll just turn to Scott's first question, which was really about what happens when the gap between the perception of sort of meritocracy and social mobility bumps up against the reality that that's not happening as quickly or in the way that people were hoping and wanting it to, and come back to kind of this idea of common prosperity, whatever that means, and simply say, I think that certainly before a lot of U.S.-China relations kind of, I think, drew the energy away from Xi Jinping looking at the domestic kind of challenges that China is facing. I do think that he understands that the system is increasingly unbalanced. So we'll sort of crack down on tutoring and other kind of ways that he has tried, I think, in his own way to sort of deal with the quote affordability agenda that we're talking about in the United States now, and really trying to think about how to improve social mobility and improve opportunity for people in the context of these really hard constraints that the hukou system presents, and other sort of really entrenched systems really make that the room to maneuver there is quite difficult. So part of it is changing the narrative. Part of it is getting people to perhaps think differently about sort of what to expect from their society, but then he has to kind of deliver in a way that this gap between the perception of what the system should deliver and the reality of what it delivers gets too big. When does it get too big? What is too big? I think that everybody tries to think about that and anticipate that, and I don't think anybody's really been that good at it. So it's a good question, a provocative question, and I hope that among all the questions that have been put on the table today, that people take them up. So thanks, Scott.
Thank you. This is just such an impressive book, and it's reflected in the type of conversation we've had today. Sitting in Washington, D.C., people are amazed by China's economic development, its technological success, and this book shows why China's been able to create so many people that have been able to contribute to that mission. At the same time, it shows a lot of the challenges and frustrations of people in Chinese society, and why things are not perfect and far from perfect, and why there's a lot of stress about the direction China is going in. In Washington, we're also thinking about industrial policy and in responding to the China challenge. And maybe people are saying we need to adopt elements of the Gaokao system as well, as you mentioned. This book is not just a single book that you just wrote now. It's a reflection of the work that Ruixue and Hongbin and your colleagues have been doing for a long time. This is a book that everybody needs to look at because it raises huge questions about not just China, but the United States and elsewhere. That's why CSIS decided it was the right thing to host this event, and you all proved today that was a good choice. So I want to thank Ruixue and Hongbin for your outstanding work in this book and everything that you've been doing, and to you, Ethan and Elizabeth, for contributing to the conversation today. We look forward to continuing to learn from all of you. I don't know how I'm going to do it a test down the road, but I really appreciate you stimulating my thinking, and for everybody who's watching, thank you, and wish everybody a great day.